Picture this: a narrow little house, barely 12 feet wide, sitting up on brick piers a few feet off the ground. A front porch just big enough for a rocking chair and a conversation. Rooms lined up one behind the other like train cars, no hallways, no wasted space. Every door swinging open to the next room and the one after that. You could stand at the front and see clean through to the backyard. That porch smelled like supper and cut grass, and whatever was blooming in the neighbor's yard. Children ran barefoot across those floors. Old folks sat in the evening air and watched the street like it was television. Somebody down the block was always playing something, always. You knew everybody, and everybody knew you. This wasn't just a house. This was a revolution. A black man built it, an African designed it, and it changed America forever. Today, we're exploring 7 extraordinary truths about the shotgun house, the forgotten genius of Black American architecture that carried an entire culture on its narrow shoulders. Let's start with where this house was really born, because the answer will blow your mind. The African origin. That is the first and most important truth you need to carry with you through this entire story. The shotgun house did not come from some clever white architect drawing plans in a comfortable office. It did not emerge from a colonial manual or a European pattern book. The shotgun house came from Africa. Specifically, it came from the Yoruba people of what is now Nigeria, where rectangular gable-roofed dwellings had been arranged in a single file, room after room, no corridor, no wasted space, for centuries before a single enslaved person ever set foot on American soil. Folklorist and George Washington University scholar John Michael Vlack spent decades tracing this lineage, and he was the first to say it plainly. The shotgun house allowed African values to be maintained without extensive modification. Think about that for a moment. In the middle of one of the most brutal systems of oppression the world has ever known, Black builders found a way to carry their architectural memory across an ocean, through bondage, and into the streets of a new world. The design didn't disappear. It survived, it traveled, and it landed first in Haiti. The enslaved West Africans who were brought to what the French called Saint-Domingue blended their Yoruba building knowledge with the simple cottage traditions of the indigenous Taino people and whatever French colonial materials were available. The result was a narrow gable entrance dwelling called the Kyle, or Taike, a Creole cottage that is, to the trained eye, essentially identical to what we later called the shotgun. Louisiana State University scholar J.D. Edwards confirmed that these structures existed in Haiti as early as 1729, documented in illustrations that look strikingly familiar to anyone who has walked down a street in New Orleans' Treme. The house was already old before America ever claimed it as its own. Now, here is the moment the shotgun house crossed the water. It happened in the summer of 1809, and it happened fast. The Haitian Revolution had ended 5 years earlier, making Haiti the first Black republic in the Western Hemisphere, and sending shockwaves through every slaveholding nation in the Americas. Refugees who had fled to Cuba were expelled when France invaded Spain. And so a flotilla arrived in New Orleans carrying 9,059 people, white Creoles, free people of color, and enslaved people, nearly doubling the city's population in a single season. By 1810, Black residents outnumbered white residents in New Orleans, roughly 10,500 to 4,500. Nearly 2/3 of the city was Black. Free people of color settled in Faubourg Treme, up to the neighborhood just outside the French Quarter that is now recognized as the oldest African-American neighborhood in the United States. And here is where the building began. Among those refugees were free men of color, many of them carpenters trained in Haitian construction traditions, who were hired by free Black women, landowners in their own right, to build homes on the narrow lots of Treme. Historian J. Edwards called this the landlady effect. These women had acquired property through a complex social arrangement unique to New Orleans. They commissioned homes. They hired their own craftsmen. And those craftsmen built what they knew: the taike, the kaili, the narrow gable front house from home. The shotgun house did not drift into New Orleans by accident. It was planted there deliberately by Black hands carrying Black knowledge. By the 1830s, these houses were rising all over the city. Some of the houses being sold in that decade had been built 15 to 20 years earlier, which puts the first American shotguns at around 1810 to 1815, right in the years following that great Haitian migration. The design had found its new soil. Now, let's talk about the design itself, because this house was not just affordable. It was brilliant. 12 feet wide, sometimes 14, 3 to 5 rooms deep, stretching anywhere from 30 to 80 feet back from the street, 600 to 1,200 square feet total. Every room opened directly into the next. There were no hallways, which sounds like a problem until you understand what it actually means. No wasted square footage. Every inch was living space. The layout moved from living room to dining room to bedroom to kitchen, with the kitchen at the back as the hottest room in the house. A decision that made complete sense in the days before air conditioning, because in the morning, when you opened both front and back doors, the cross breeze moved through every single room in the house. Heat escaped, air circulated, the high ceilings, 9 to 12 feet, let hot air rise and pool above your head instead of cooking you alive. The house sat up on brick piers 2 to 3 feet off the ground, which kept termites away, allowed airflow beneath the floor, and provided flood protection in low-lying southern cities. The single-layer, uninsulated walls let moisture pass through rather than trapping it to rot the wood. The simple box shape distributed stress equally across all 4 corners, which is why so many of these houses are still standing after 150 years. The Oklahoma Historical Society noted that a shotgun required neither blueprints nor skilled carpenters. You could build one with locally available lumber, basic tools, and enough hands. That was not a limitation. That was the whole point. The name is one of the great mysteries in American folk history, and the popular answer is almost certainly wrong. You have probably heard it. You could fire a shotgun through the front door and the pellets would exit the back without hitting a single wall. It is a good story. It just doesn't hold up. J.D. Edwards pointed out that many shotgun houses don't have aligned doorways at all, which punches a rather large hole in the firearms theory. The Preservation Resource Center of New Orleans labels it a flat-out legend. Historians searching through 19th century New Orleans records have found 0 primary sources using the term. The scholarly consensus points somewhere else entirely. Back to Africa. John Michael Vlach proposed that the name comes from the Fon language of Dahomey, present-day Benin, where Tugun means place of assembly. The Yoruba word Togun translates as house or dwelling place. The theory holds that black builders in New Orleans called their homes by this name, and English speakers heard it and twisted it into something familiar. The earliest known printed use of the word shotgun house in American English appeared in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution on August 30th, 1903. A classified ad for houses near a railroad yard priced at $1,200 for 2 3-room homes. The word wasn't written into a New Orleans building permit until 1918. What everyone had been casually calling by its African name for a century, the paperwork only started catching up to in the 20th. The house had been speaking its language all along. Now, here is the truth that should stop you cold. The shotgun house was not just a shelter. It was a financial instrument, one of the only tools available to black families in the post-Civil War South for building wealth when virtually every other door had been slammed shut. In 1890, in Memphis, Tennessee, a developer sold lots from the former Dederick plantation to black families for approximately $40 per lot. That is roughly $1,400 in today's money. And families bought those lots and built shotgun houses and created Orange Mound, which grew into one of the most prosperous and prestigious black neighborhoods in the urban South, home to teachers, doctors, business owners, and artists who had nowhere else to go. In Houston, approximately 1,000 freed enslaved people settled in the 4th Ward, Freedmen's Town, starting in 1866, just 1 year after emancipation. They built shotgun houses. They hand-paved their own streets with bricks. By 1880, that neighborhood housed 95% of black Houstonians, and would eventually support over 400 Black-owned businesses. In New Orleans's lower Ninth Ward, a neighborhood the wider world would not hear about until a hurricane brought it to its knees, 85% of the houses were owner-occupied by the late 20th century. Most of them were shotguns. Think about what that means. In a country that had spent 2 centuries systematically preventing Black families from accumulating property, these communities found a crack in the wall and built through it. A house that required no architect, no mortgage officer, no contractor with a license, and a relationship with a white bank. Just lumber, nails, skill, and stubbornness. Elvis Presley's father, Vernon, built a 2-room shotgun in Tupelo, Mississippi in 1934 for $180. $180. That was a home. That was ownership. That was dignity made of pine. And notice the intelligence embedded in that economy. The double shotgun, 2 narrow units sharing a central wall, first appearing in New Orleans as early as 1854, meant a family could live on one side and rent the other. Suddenly, that $180 investment became a source of income. The Camelback variation added a partial second story only at the rear, giving you extra rooms, while most cities taxed the whole thing as a single-story dwelling. That wasn't an accident. That was a workaround built into the architecture itself. The same people who weren't allowed to attend the same schools, drink from the same fountains, or borrow from the same banks were quietly outmaneuvering a tax system that didn't even realize what was happening. The shotgun house was not just a home. It was a strategy. But a house is never just a house. What was born in those narrow rooms, on those 12-foot wide lots, on those front porches where everybody could hear everybody else's business and nobody pretended otherwise. What was born in those spaces was the greatest music America has ever produced. Faubourg Treme in New Orleans, packed wall to wall with shotgun houses and Creole cottages, is recognized as the birthplace of jazz. At Congo Square, just steps from those porches, enslaved Africans had gathered on Sundays to play drums, dance, and hold on to the traditions that no one could legally take from them. The neighborhood produced Sidney Bechet, Jelly Roll Morton, Kermit Ruffins, and Trombone Shorty, and it produced, on August 4th, 1901, at 723 Jane Alley, in a shotgun house near the edge of Treme, a boy named Louis Armstrong, Satchmo himself. He remembered his block as having more people crowded into it than you could imagine, all of them living within earshot of each other, music passing through walls and out of open doors and down the street and back again. That density was not poverty. That density was proximity. It was the condition that made jazz possible. In the Mississippi Delta, the shotgun house was the birthplace of the blues. Robert Johnson, the king of the Delta blues, drew his last breath in a shotgun house at the Star of the West Plantation north of Greenwood, Mississippi, on August 16, 1938. The front porch, that strip of covered wood between your private world and the street, was the stage where musicians worked out their songs before taking them anywhere else. It was a church with no walls. It was a rehearsal space that belonged to the whole block. Muhammad Ali grew up in a shotgun-style house at 3302 Grand Avenue in Louisville's Parkland neighborhood, the greatest himself, the house that made him. And then there is John Biggers, the artist born in a shotgun in Gastonia, North Carolina, in 1924, who spent his life painting these houses, not as symbols of poverty, but as sacred architecture. He identified African cultural symbols in the triangular pediment, in the rectilinear facade. He saw the geometry of fire and earth. His paintings directly inspired artist Rick Lowe to found Project Row Houses in Houston's 3rd Ward in 1993, transforming 22 abandoned shotguns into art installations and a young mother's housing program. Lowe won a MacArthur Fellowship for this work in 2014. The shotgun house, that everyone had called the poor man's house, turned out to be the richest building in the neighborhood. And then they tore them down. That is the part of this story that sits in the chest like something you cannot put a name to. After World War II, America fell in love with the suburb and the automobile. The Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956 sent rivers of concrete pouring through the hearts of American cities. The engineers with their clipboards looked at the maps and drew their lines through the neighborhoods that had the least power to fight back. In 1966, North Claiborne Avenue in Treme was cleared of over 200 live oak trees, ancient, shade-giving trees under which Black New Orleans had gathered, celebrated, danced, and mourned for generations, to make way for the Oitin Claiborne Expressway. Where nearly 500 homes were removed. Before the highway, 123 businesses had lined that stretch of avenue. Decades later, fewer than half remained. Then Hurricane Katrina arrived in August of 2005 and finished what the highway had started. 134,000 housing units in New Orleans were damaged. The lower Ninth Ward, where those shotguns stood on their brick piers, with 85% of them owner-occupied, lost an estimated 4,000 to 5,300 homes. About 175,000 Black residents left. About 100,000 came back. The rest scattered to cities that had never heard their music, neighborhoods that didn't know their names. The children who grew up in those houses are still alive. They remember the smell of the wood. They remember how the light came through the front door at a certain angle in the late afternoon and turned everything gold. They remember the voices of neighbors through walls that were never meant to be thick. They remember that somebody was always there, always close, always within the sound of your voice if something went wrong. You cannot put a dollar value on that, and you cannot rebuild it with a voucher and a relocation notice. But here is what you need to know about what remains and what is being reclaimed. Louisville, Kentucky now holds the largest collection of shotgun houses in any American city, an estimated 8,000 or more, roughly 10% of all residential housing in the city. New Orleans still stands with about 25,000 shotgun-type structures. Preservation groups, artists, and architects are fighting for every single one. In Houston, Project Row Houses has grown to 39 structures across 5 city blocks. In Atlanta, the National Trust for Historic Preservation restored shotgun houses within sight of Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthplace. In cities from San Antonio to Apalachicola to Winston-Salem, organizations are buying these houses for $1 and restoring them rather than let them disappear. And young architects are building new ones. In Georgia's Serenbe community, modern shotguns go up with geothermal heating and Earthcraft certification, selling for prices that a working family can afford. In New Orleans, firms are designing new shotgun prototypes that honor the scale and rhythm of the old neighborhoods while meeting the demands of the present. What the tiny house movement is discovering in 2024, the Black builders of New Orleans understood in 1810, small, efficient, well-ventilated, and community-oriented is not a compromise. It is a philosophy. Here is the truth underneath all these truths. The shotgun house was never small because Black people had small dreams. It was narrow because that is all the space the world was willing to give. And Black genius took that 12 feet and built jazz inside it, and blues inside it, and home ownership inside it, and community inside it, and art inside it, and a whole way of being alive in the world that the broader culture is still trying to understand and name. The grandmother who swept that porch every morning was not performing a chore. She was maintaining a threshold between her world and the street, a boundary she owned that belonged to her people, that no one could cross without her say-so. The father who raised those ceilings as high as he could afford understood something about dignity that no textbook ever wrote down. The children who ran from room to room through those open doors, never once hitting a wall, never once being stopped. They were living in a house that had been designed across centuries and oceans to keep moving forward. When you see a shotgun house, whether it's standing proud with fresh paint in New Orleans or faded and leaning in a neighborhood nobody visits anymore or gone entirely, just a concrete slab where something warm once stood, look at it knowing what it carried. Look at it knowing who built it. Look at it knowing that somewhere in that 12-foot width, compressed like a song, is the full weight of what Black people in this country built from almost nothing and refused to let go. Thank you so much for spending this time with us on this journey, back through one of the most remarkable and underappreciated chapters in Black American history. If this story moved you the way it moved us, please hit that like button. It means the world, and it helps more people find their way to stories like this one. Share it with someone who remembers these houses, someone who grew up in one, someone who needs to know that what their grandparents built was not small, it was genius. And if you haven't subscribed yet, join us. There are more stories like this one waiting for you. We'll see you in the next one.